Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Monday stream. Doing something a little bit different today. I wanted to talk about a specific product. This is the Equator2, and it's one of the MPE style synths from Rowley. And I'm really interested in this type of technology, but I'm not always interested in paying for the Rowley. They've definitely had their journey, I would say, as a company, and I like what they're doing. But for me personally, I don't always see eye to eye with that performance technique. You know, the really rubbery keyboards. I know people who use them and love them, swear by them, and so I'm not saying anything else about that. But for me personally, I've tried it, and I've just never really. It's like I'm already not enough of a keyboardist in the first place, but then to add some of that on there, I think is a little bit tricky. So we're going to look at their instrument though, because the minute I saw that they were coming out with the Equator2, I wanted to take a peek and see if it would work with the MPE stuff already built into Logic. And then I thought, maybe not everyone fully realizes what the MPE stuff in Logic can even do. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit today. So let me fly over to the setup. Now, this is a relatively complex setup today. So if you're not seeing something I'm saying or looking at, then just let me know in the chat. But we have one camera on the iPad because the iPad is my main MPE input source. I've got below that on the screen, on the streaming screen, I have an actual live screen capture from the MPE. So if I push from the iPad, so if I push a key here, you should see the keys light up. And then, of course, me, audio from all the different places, and then the instruments behind on the screen itself. So what we have is a relatively complex synthesizer, and I'm just getting into it. So I'm really digging what I've seen so far. It actually has the feel, and this is for better or worse, of Alchemy. So I'll explain. It's like a darker scheme, but you'll see the knobs look similar. And then we have two bands on the outside of the knobs. And those are showing us the modulation. So the actual interface is very similar if you've ever used Alchemy, that you're going to be able to use both of these and kind of understand a little bit about it. But let me talk a little bit about MPE, maybe in the most general terms, because I think it's something we have to kind of change how we think about some of our tools to do this. So, and the Equator2 keyboard at the bottom is a perfect way to do this because it shows essentially what is aftertouch as the size of a little knob there. So I'm going to push a key on my traditional keyboard below my iPad, and I'm going to push down a little harder at the end for aftertouch to engage. Let me go to the right instrument. Yeah, that would help. There we go. So you see a little dot. When I push down a little harder, it gets bigger and it does some sort of modulation. Well, that's the case with all of the keys except with traditional keyboards that are non-MPE, which is pretty much most of them, unless you have an MPE special keyboard. If I push down two notes away from each other, and I'm just going to push a little harder with the top one, but look at the little balls there for both of them. They both get bigger. That's because aftertouch on this keyboard is it's a generic thing. It means if I do it in one, it affects the aftertouch. It affects it for all of the keys. That's not what this synthesizer can do, though. And so if I'm going to use an MPE enabled keyboard, in this case the iPad Logic app, it does this. So I can push two keys. I get that effect independently of the key. And in fact, because this is a screen, I can actually do this thing where it's like I'm put it into pitch mode, which is this little key. It's like a little button right in the center above the keyboard. You'll see it kind of shifting there on the bottom one. The first is glissando. The next is scroll to move the keyboard. And the last one is pitch. And we can actually do individual keys, not only with the aftertouch effect, which you can control different things, but also with pitch bend. And those can be done independently of each other. Now, we're not just talking about one instrument that can do this. The Equator2 is an instrument that can do it, but a lot of the instruments in Logic can do this. So we have retro synth. So let's load up this. Not only the pitch, but also and so it can do different parameters depending on where you're pushing. Now, the difference between this and like a Rowley keyboard would be that in this case, I have a flat screen and I can only engage it by moving further up the actual key on the glass. With the Rowley, you're going to have a little different experience because obviously you're going to be able to push each of those keys a little bit differently and move it in different directions. And so we're working with perhaps a more limited version in some ways, but we get some of that power still with it anyway. And so that's the kind of cool thing. We also can do this with Alchemy. Let me switch over to Alchemy. The side to side, and also but I would say with Alchemy, we have a lot of instruments which aren't taking advantage of that in there, although you can program them to take advantage of it. With retro synth, we have a lot of things that you can do, mostly with filters. With this instrument is built from the ground up to take advantage of this. And so you'll see when we, for instance, go into the file management to load up patches, we can definitely just have it filter out MPE as an option. And then you're going to see all of these different ones and their banks that are available. And so, I mean, there's a lot of different things in here. Ambient dulcimer. Oh, still on the wrong one. Let's go back. You can see my wrist on the video there. That's about it. But you can see down below. Okay. That means we have a lot of instruments in here that are really cool with this, that you can do a lot with to create interesting sounds. You change the way that you're thinking about performance, and you have to figure out what each one of them does, because each one of them is going to do something a little bit different. But I like having this ability even without the actual Rowley keyboard. And then I'll be checking comments as well. So Francis says, which Mac computer is better for music production, Mac Mini M2 Pro or the Mac One or the M1 Mac Studio? You may have asked, I got a question like this morning in one of the comments and I answered it, but right now, just the simple answer is I would go with the Mac Mini M2 Pro fully loaded instead of the M1 Mac Studio. That's just me. if I were buying them today. So what I want to know, if you're watching this video later, which probably is the time when most people would be watching it, how many of you are using your iPad with this MPE functionality? That's what I'm curious about, because it is something that it's super interesting, but I don't know how many people are actually taking advantage of it or even are aware about it. And so in Logic right now, let me see, I don't know if I can do this. No, it won't let me. So let me try to just do the help file. And we'll do MIDI mono mode. I just want to see what it says here. Yeah, it's not even going to really. So here's all it's going to say. And this is in the Alchemy one. In either mode, each voice receives on a different MIDI channel per voice channels support pitch bend, aftertouch, mod wheel, and performance control assignment messages. So those are the things that we're getting sent over here. And that's even though they're not calling it MPE in Logic, it's the MIDI mono mode, which is what we turn on to make it work with the other instruments. And so I think that's the key here, is making sure you understand. You also have to have the input device. So in this case, it's the iPad. You could also do this with other MPE compatible instruments. And so that would be interesting. But I just really like the ability of having all of this control on a note-by-note basis. So you can do some really interesting things here. Let's go back to the one I had at the very beginning, the Seaboard Models Choir. There we go. Let's go back up just a little higher. Sometimes when you load a new preset, it turns the MIDI mono mode off. So you get a lot of different performance options there. I don't think that was the same one I had when we first started. Let me see if I can. Cyborg Models Choir. That might have been it. So you can bend those notes and do whole chord sequences without ever taking your fingers off and push them forward for a different timbre change. So some really cool sound design that you can do with this. If you're trying to do like an interesting sound, musical bass, synth bass, sound design for like a horror film or something. Well, needs some fine tuning, but some cool ideas. Let's see. Francis says, what spec should I go for? The M2 Pro Mini for music production. I mean, the simplest way is go for what you think you need in terms of the power. I mean, if you're worried about it becoming obsolete in a couple of years, then go for the top. You can't upgrade it internally. So then the second thing is, how much money do you have and want to spend on it? Yolan says, I am moving from iMac to a laptop, really expensive, but I have been missing a laptop sorely. And since the discs are so expensive, I only want one computer, so I'm buying a MacBook Pro M2 16-inch. Cool. Yeah, the new M2 computers they're pretty slick. I gotta say, they're jumping up performance-wise what feels like really quickly right now. And so, I mean, we can just start the rumor mill now. I mean, because the power continues to fly up, that means that all of the teams have been told to make sure that the Apple software pushes the limits still, right? And so I'm assuming Logic is going to take some major jump and have some new feature which is really going to push the boundaries. I think they were hoping that spatial audio would do that, but I can't tell you how many people are super excited about spatial audio, partially because there's a lot less people excited about it than we all assumed there would be. And so I think, that being said, sure, if someone's doing a lot of spatial audio stuff, maybe they've invested in a top of the line Mac to do that, but most people are still hesitant to go down that road. And my instincts are, my spidey sense is saying that spatial audio is not going to be the rampant industry takeover that people were hoping it was going to be. And even though it's cool, it's not. It's not in one of the few markets that that really would make a difference, and that'd be video games. And so video games are doing things their own way or using ambisonics. And so what's going to push this Apple spatial format forward? Probably not their VR headsets that they're going to be releasing either later this year or next year, because ambisonics does at least 360. The Apple spatial stuff only does half of that, the top half. And so who knows? Elon says, I have the feeling that my iMac from 2017 has become slower the last few months, but yeah, I mean, all of my old, it's like when I first got, every time I get a new computer, brand new computer, it feels fast and it feels so snappy. And maybe I should learn the lesson of never upgrading anything on it, and it will maintain that snappy feeling, but they certainly do feel like they get slower as time goes on, don't they? It's kind of interesting. Cool. We're moving into the Q&A part of this stream, apparently. The Equator2, just to close this off, it's like I need to do just a straight ahead tutorial on this thing because it's a super interesting instrument. Today it was more about the control of anything that's MPE related in Logic using the iPad, including this instrument. But I mean, this thing does everything. I mean, it's really cool. It's like sampling, wavetable, granular, noise based. I mean, this thing really, I would say, is a true competitor for Alchemy, except Alchemy does additive and some others. So it's really maybe best a good marriage between the two. And I think that if you want something that does wavetable amazingly, then this is probably your best bet. The only other wavetable thing we have inside Logic would be the table version of Retro Synth, which is a wavetable synth and does some cool things, but it's not like this. And so I think that for everyone who's saying, well, great, another instrument, which one should we do? Or, if you have a Rowley keyboard, this is a no-brainer. If you like MPE but don't have a Rowley, this is still a no-brainer. If you really like synthesis and don't have a good wavetable synth, or something that just has like endless control options, I mean, this thing is like pretty intense. I'm going to get into it because I really want to like see if I can design things that I can't get someplace else. Okay. Well, kind of a slower stream today, and that's okay. I think anytime I put up a product name, a specific name, I'm pretty sure that most of the people kind of, turn their heads and go look for something else. But I think tomorrow or the next day, we're going to do a roundup of all of the different rumors about new versions of Logic, because it's time over the next few months to start looking forward to what's coming next, as always. And I think we've had like a good year with Logic, with new things. And so I think we have a lot to be like looking forward to. But certainly we have not hit the end of the life cycle of this software, and they're going to be doing some new cool things. And so let's waste some time talking about it, because that's the best part of it. Gigadeath says M2 is better if you have single very hitting instruments. If you have a lot of instruments in parallel, M1 max it is. Higher parallel power. Although so Gigadeath, yes. And yes, I mean, you're right. But the one thing that people were saying, let's go to the Apple site for a second. And we'll go to Mac Mini. Let's buy one, right? Let's pretend we're buying one. Hold on, I'm going to go back for 1 second. Was that Final Cut? Yeah, okay. Cool. So, M2 Pro, right? Select. With 12-core CPU. Now, let's do another tab real quick. And we'll do the Mac Studio. Just the Macs, of course. Yeah, that's the one on the left. So, here's where the difference is. With M1 Max, the base 2 models, the first two, that have a 10-core, great. Go with a Mac Mini, because you're already at the 12-core. But if you're going to be able to go, no, that's it. I mean, so right now, we're looking at 32 gigs of unified memory. Let's price these out just like that. Let's see, what does that one start with in terms of hard drive? 512. Okay, cool. So we're at $2,000 for that one, and $2,200 for this one that has 2 fewer cores than the Mac Mini Pro. So we're paying more for less. Now there is another difference. The 19-core GPU on the Mini, and this has a 32-core GPU, but that has a 16-core neural engine. So really, for $2,000, you're getting a better computer than the Max, maxed out with the Max, right there. Except you can go to 64 gigs of unified memory for an extra $400. And on this one, we can't do that. So, okay, for me, what that means is, you should really, if you're buying a computer right this moment, then the Mac Mini M2 Pro maxed out is a better deal, super better deal. Has some other issues though. And yes, Gigadeath, how you doing? Rowley is in business. They were able to revamp, and they have a new Seaboard coming out. Their ads have been all over my Facebook, which means I clicked on one at some point or heard me talking. But they're back, and I just talked to them. This is the Equator2 was just released recently, which is an amazing MPE-enabled, focused, featured synthesizer. It has all of the same problems that Logic and Ableton have with a stupid interface that they're trying to just cram too much on there. But everything I've seen so far seems that it's there for a reason, and it's just so powerful when it comes to MPE stuff. And then Yelan says, I think you were right about single core, but according to Max Text, there's no difference in Logic for multi-core. I mean, there are situations, but there are some issues. So because some things are single core focused in Logic, the M2 makes a better deal in that case. And then Gigadeath says, I think it is nice that the studio has very quiet cooling. M2 Pro is 4 efficiency cores. Gigadeath in Germany, the same specs, RAM and LAN, and the Mini is more expensive. Oh, interesting. I don't want to speak about that. My studio in December. I'm using the Mac Studio Ultra right this moment. And I've got the 64 gigs of memory and the 2 terabyte drive and the 20 cores. So essentially I've got this one right here and that memory. So I did not take it up to the 64 core GPU for another $1,000. Dear God, that's so much. But it's not something I needed personally. Wanted, not needed. And then of course I thought about the 120 gigs of unified memory instead of 64. And again, I couldn't justify another $800 either when I wanted that. So if I'd gone with the 1 terabyte of storage, I might have been able to go with the 128 gigs of unified memory. But the internal storage is such a fast highway that it's like I didn't want to have to deal with other stuff. So there we have it. And I got the education discount, which means mine clocked in at $4,000 exactly. And it took almost 6 months to arrive when I bought it. It was right during the big rush. Even here, it's still a month away. Month to a month and a half. I'm guessing a month and a half. They're beasts. I also like that, there are still more things in terms of being able to plug in. So I think that it's still a better deal overall for what I do. Cool. RAM is only an issue if you are using the context sampler. The Logic sampler is way more efficient. Yes. The context sampler, I used to be in love with that years ago. And it has now done much of what Logic sampler did for a while, which was stagnate. And in my opinion, it's still really good. It's always had advanced features, but I feel like for the first time, Logic sampler in the last couple years has really blown the competition out of the water in terms of overall workflow. From beginning to end, using the sampling features of Logic, I think are one of the most powerful sets anywhere. From the auto sampler to the way flex time and pitch is incorporated into it, to being able to use the sampler or Alchemy, because Alchemy handles EXS24 files, and then you can build an entire synth engine off of those samples. There's very few things that are as flexible and powerful and integrated as the sampling features in Logic. And I would love to be proven wrong, but nobody can convince me, probably. The closest anyone could come is with, simpler and stuff in Ableton, but, there are things that Ableton can't do overall in terms of my workflow. And so, we'll live with that. RAM management is like GigaSampler. Yes, funny story about Giga Studio and GigaSampler. This had to be Christmas 2002. My family got me Giga Studio for Christmas, and within like 6 months, like Tascam or whatever, the purchase there, and then they shut it down. I was like, oh my gosh, I hate this. So then I got into Redmatica, all the auto sampling and stuff that they did, and then Apple bought them and shut them down. It's like, come on. But now I'm completely satisfied with my sampling abilities in Logic. So and I agree with Giga Death about that. The issue, he says, that there is no package format to do commercial sample libraries. Yeah. But all the sampling I'm doing is for my own projects for the most part. I once worked with a company in England. We released a bunch of vintage synth sample banks, and then they went out of business. It's hard to maintain those kind of businesses. I also, with a bunch of students, we did a whole vintage keys sample library for Studio One, and it was like Studio One version 5 or 4. And they discontinued that bank because they updated one of their formats, and so the old one didn't work anymore. But for a number of years, one of my banks was like something that when you got Studio One, you'd get the vintage keys, and it was stuff that my students and I had made. It was old school tech for sure. Kind of crummy tech, actually, but okay. We've been going for about 33 minutes. I was intending on this to be a shorter one. I wanted to spark or kind of gauge the interest in the MPE stuff and Logic. Now that we have like a number of you in, what do you use MPE stuff in Logic? Gigadet says, think about BBC Orchestral as Logic multi-sampler. I created 1+ gigabyte stylophone library, but it's hard to distribute. Yeah. So what do you use, Gigadeath, for your MPE stuff? Anybody else who's listening too? Okay. Seaboard 25. It's cool. I mean, I talked about this early on the stream. I don't think I'm ever going to get one of the actual Seaboards. I've tested them out, used them at trade shows, and had students who have them. And I always play, and I think, you know what? This isn't something that speaks to me as a need. I like, definitely for my own workflow, the piano style stuff. And so I'm more happy with like key. I'd rather have a grand piano. There was this Moog piano bar. I don't know if you probably can still find them. I don't think it's released or available new anymore. I don't think. but you put it up on the keys of a keyboard, and there's little lasers, and it tracks what you're doing in terms of velocity and which key you're playing. And so it turns like a grand piano into a MIDI controller. I want something like that. I want a grand piano and it to just output some MIDI for me. That's like the dream, but probably not realistic. And then MPE and Logic Sampler is really cool, is what Gigadeath is saying. And like a lot of the instruments. So this one aside, this is the one on the screen, of course, is the Equator2. And aside from this instrument being super awesome, any of the instruments in Logic which do this are pretty amazing. I haven't really done much. I've used it with retro synth for the most part, and every once in a while with alchemy. But let's load up just something here. Let's see. Pop strings. I don't even know which. So really what we're looking for is any instrument that has any of those parameters we looked at earlier in terms of their control already. So that one doesn't, but any of them where you're doing like aftertouch to control a filter, because MPE is literally just saying you can send aftertouch data for each of the keys independently or pitch for each of the keys independently, then anything that has those parameters you can do this with. It's not a separate set of parameters. It's just a different way of transporting each of those individual things. And then, okay, cool. Well, other questions? Anything at all? This is a good time to like shift into other things. Like I said, I think I'm going to do a stream tomorrow where we're just going to do the rumor mill. And Yolan, so aftertouch is one thing. So aftertouch on my big keyboard is like a blanket thing. I do it on one key. It affects all of them. MPE just means that you have a controller that can send it individually per note. So yes, a Rowley or the iPad control app, which does, the mono mode as Logic calls it, which is MPE, or any of those things. Yeah, so Gigadeath, I agree. That's exactly right. You don't need a Rowley to do MPE. So this is interesting. For instance, let's record just something on this retro synth for a second. Let's go back to this. Right? So what does this data actually look like? That's, I think, the thing that some people get caught up on as well. That's not the one, this one. So look down here. I'll zoom in for a second. We have note velocities and pitch bends for each channel. So let's look at pitch bend here. You'll see that it goes down that one note. Aftertouch on 3, on 4, on 5, on 6. This becomes much more difficult to actually edit, but it's all still very possible. So you just have to figure out exactly where the data is that you want to edit. This is the tricky part. Logic does this, but it doesn't do it very well. And so you have to actually be kind of a detective every once in a while to figure this out. but I do like it. Oh, a bunch of stuff came in. Gigadesk says sampler instruments with predefined effects stored as channel instrument. How to organize it best? Oh man, that's a great question. I have my own way, which is not always the best way. Because you can store things in terms of instruments. So with predefined effects stored as channel instruments. So you can just use the logic way, which is save channel strip setting as, and it will do all of the effects and anything loaded up in terms of the instrument and the control and all of that stuff. That's the first part. But sometimes when I'm doing smart controls with things, which I tend to use a lot with my breath controller, with my touche controller, neither of which are within hand reaching right now. Those I use smart controls for all the time because I like how that happens. So you can save those kind of too. And so what I do is I always have like, when I develop like an instrument of some sort, then I'm using my browser for the most part. And it's like I go to all files and I go to music and I'm like, dang, that I'll have songs that things are known for, right? And so I'll go into Logic and I'll say, where's that song? Song ideas. This is one that I've been working on. And then here's that song. I'm opening it up inside a different place, right? So this is let's see, retro synth. Where's the instrument I want? Bum, 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 bum. Well, it must be this one right here. I'm gonna do the content, the plugins, even the automation. This thing right here is, I don't need the bus number though. And then I'll say add it, right? Oh, that wasn't the right one. It was the right one right there. I just didn't look far enough down. So that's like all of my stuff for that instrument. And it could be that that's the exact instrument sound I wanted someplace else. And so for me, this is how I will pull different presets for my own use. It's like I keep track of where I had them and what song, and then I can just go through and decide which pieces. If I want the actual part I played, or if I just want the instrument, if I want all the effects that came with it. So there's the spread, the EQ, and the compression, even with the sidechain, even though the sidechain I'll have to adjust because I didn't bring in the other track that had the sidechain. And so it's like you store these up in the different projects you're working on. At some point, you could do like a template style project where you put all your instruments in one, and then you just go and pull them using this the browser that way, which works. Let's see. Okay, Yolan says, I have a Nectar which doesn't have multi-aftertouch, so no then. Gigadesk says, I'm always struggling with building up my own presets. And thanks, by the way, Gigadesk, for sending me that other email with your template in it. I am working on doing a stream probably next week where I talk about it. So I think it's pretty intense. But it's like I want to show people other ways of working, which are cool. Gigadesk says as well, the Seaboard is easy to customize, so hitting a note can be exact as a piano or like a string. That makes sense. And then Ultimate Moralizer says, is that a new stock plugin? Which one are you talking about? The one that was on the thumbnail? If that is the one you're asking for about no, that is one from Rowley, the inventors of the Seaboard. But I think it's a really good fit inside of Logic's offerings. Thomas says, all those automation lanes, there are 8 lanes now. Is there a way to show all lanes at once? can you do it in the main window but not in the edit view down there? So check it out. The answer is yes. So if we go to A, I mean, it is possible to do this. I don't know if it really is helpful or not, but let me see. We are on the right one. No, maybe not. That might actually, because it's... No, I can't do it that way. Because those are the track and the region one. So let's... Oh, yeah, so I can. I just have to switch the button right there from track to region. Now, can you put them all onto one actual place? Not as much. But for instance, I could do aftertouch, all of those ones there, and see where they're doing it. So check this out. And then now I can listen and see where I need to make some changes to it. So you could put them all up here, but you can't put them all into one. You can cycle through, but that's not really going to help you too much either. I wouldn't mind having them all on one if they were different colors, and then it was easy to guarantee us clicking. But this is pretty useful to put them up like this. So region versus track. So the track refer to the automation tied to the actual sequencer track. And then you click on that for region, and it shows you the ones that are attached to the region itself. Hopefully, between Thomas and Elon, this is the answer you were looking for. Maybe not the one you were hoping for, though. It's like the automation features in Logic are like 87% what they could be. They're not bad, but they're also, there's room to improve for sure. Like anybody who's ever used Nuendo or Cubase or the top tier of Pro Tools for post-production knows just how many more things you can do with automation. And Logic does quite a bit, probably more than most people use, but that doesn't mean that it's as much as it could be, that's for sure. Okay, we're going to narrow down here to like 4 more minutes. So get your last questions in if you have any. I know we just had like a surge of people jumping on the stream, but that's, I mean, it's like I've got to go like 45 minutes and then people start noticing that there's a stream happening. And so we'll be back next week, or not next week. We're going to do more this week. I'm trying to intermix some, prepared videos, intermix with the live streams, just so that the YouTube algorithm doesn't like start messing with people finding my content. But we'll be doing a little bit of both. This video could have been like a prepared video just talking about the Equator2, but I like in this case, more like the demonstration part of it and going in different directions. So far, nobody's been interested in the Equator2 directly. And I wonder if that's a problem that Rowley is going to be having. Just creating an instrument which isn't like a default part of a workstation. And it isn't one of the big name ones, even though Rowley is a name that everyone's like, Gigadeath was like, oh, they're still a company, because they seem to maybe almost have closed not too long ago, but they're still here and they're doing a resurgence, and we'll see what their journey, how their journey unfolds over time. but you never know. Any last questions or thoughts before we pull the plug? Doing a countdown in my head from 10 to 0. Well, I sure have fun talking to you guys. This is a cool format. The only thing that would be better is if it would be easy to like pull somebody on as a guest and say, just like put you on as a box in the top corner and have you like actually have a conversation back and forth. Since that's not a possibility, even though I wish it would be, I still appreciate you all being in the chat and adding comments. I read them all, even if I didn't respond to them all. But I will talk to you all later. See you later. Bye.